that they will also be productive and really help promote growth in Asia and the Pacific. So, of course, you're familiar with the idea of a just transition to net zero. So, my overall approach here is I'm going to call the net zero moonshot. So that's the kind of framework that I'm going to use, and that is very much based on the idea of a just transition. That the impact of climate change is affecting those countries most that have had very little role in creating the problem, and that I think is a very fundamental moral and ethical basis for why these flows of funds and why these investments need to happen now. But what I'm going to argue is that it's not going to be enough. We need to have also the right policies in place for this capital to come in, and we can talk more about the specifics, but I will give you sort of a broad framework for thinking about that. And my basic message is going to be that yes, we need to think about infrastructure, but we need to think infrastructure in a very broad way, including also the capacity to absorb infrastructure and what is needed in terms of building a fundamental state capacity to make this a successful journey. So I'm going to say a few words now about sort of general situation as we see it in Asia. And of course, again, the net zero transition is not happening fast enough, not globally and not in Asia. And if you look at Asia, there are very large fossil fuel footprint across emerging Asia. And unfortunately, with I think the big exception of China, there is very little innovation in the sense not only of genuine new technologies and processes coming to the market, but also in the more general sense of bringing technologies and processes and so on to the countries that are affected in Asia. And another feature that will be important for my story is that state-owned enterprises and state-owned banks are very heavily overexposed to fossil waste compared to the private sector. That is the case. So what I'm going to put forward is this idea of a net zero moonshot. It's what we call a mission-oriented approach, where you look at what are you trying to achieve and what do you need from the state, from the private sector, from civil society. And that mission-oriented approach is really very much focused on enhancing the capacity of the state to transform itself, but also to be effective in working with the private sector, that we get the good sides of the private sector and not the bad sides of corruption and so on. So I put this in 6 bullets. The first one is, as I already alluded to, the state-owned institutions must go from laggards to leaders. And by that I mean that state-owned institutions, both the state-owned enterprises that are so important for many Asian countries, but also the state-owned banks, they must go from what they today are laggards with large overexposure to fossil fuel technologies. They must be incentivized. The governments must use these institutions that they have at least some nominal control over to encourage them to go into renewables. So you could take one example, India, for example, where almost all the renewable investments have happened in the private sector, and most of the state-owned enterprises and state-owned financial institutions are heavily invested in fossil fuels. So we need to create examples where they also get a stake in promoting the net zero transition, and of course ultimately phasing out also the fossil fuel assets. So that's what I mean by going from laggards to leaders. And there is now, for example, Oil India has invested in renewables, and so there are some points of light, and we need to make them more and brighter. Obviously, the state-owned institution can't do all of the work. You need the private sector very much, and you will talk more about that later, and I understand you have also discussed it earlier. But for the private sector to work, you need state capacity. You need to be able to make sure that you are regulating, you are enforcing competition policy, you are doing procurement in the right way, and so on. And that will require a lot of capacity from the states, and very much particularly when it comes to the energy sector, getting the regulatory framework right is very important. And here you can engage with the private sector, not only to regulate it and have it perform certain tasks, but also help working with the private sector to build capacity. And we'll talk about PPPs later on, but I think that is a very good example of how, by working with the private sector, you can build up capacity in the state that can allow you to be much more effective in across other collaborations. So, for example, creating PPP units in ministries of finance or other key ministries can concentrate skills and make it more effective in setting up well-functioning PPPs. We know that the record is not uniquely or only positive. There have been many issues around PPPs as well. The third element is green technology adoption. So it's not about necessarily finding new, and that's not, for most countries, this is not realistic to find a lot of new technologies or new processes and so on. But it's really to facilitate and make sure that you get access to these technologies, and you get access to these technologies without building up huge amounts of dollar debt. And we can come back to that, because I think is a very big issue that we need to address. How do we make sure that these financings are happening in local currencies? And there are some ideas on the table now that can, I think, promote that. The fourth element is what I call a meaningful carbon price, and that will really be a litmus test on how these moonshots will work. So the carbon price is, of course, important to affect consumption of households and companies and so on. But it's also very important to send signals throughout the economy to adopt these new green technologies that are, as you know, become so much cheaper now. And there are still some issues around, creating stable flows and so on. But in terms of cost, these are now come down a lot. And if we have a meaningful carbon price, that's going to facilitate this process very much. But a carbon price is not sufficient. We need to have mission-driven coordination, and that's across the whole government, and finding ways of creating platforms that can facilitate this coordination. It's about obviously coordinating policies, but it's also about making sure that there is strong and transparent procurement. It's about creating centers of excellence with key skills, like what I mentioned, PPP units and so on, to really identify where we have limited resources, where can we focus them, and to make sure that we have the right skills. Obviously, a lot of the technology procurement will be very important to have those kind of centers of excellence. And finally, and this is extremely important to make this whole thing sustainable, is that it must be as smooth and as fair as possible. You need to create visibility for your citizens, where we're going and what it's going to entail, and try to avoid too much volatility and make sure that no one is left behind. Without that, these policies are not going to be sustainable. So these are the main points I wanted to make. I'll now make it a bit more, elaborate a few of them a bit more. So I said that the fossil fuel assets are, extremely important, and you can see here comparing private sector investments and SVE investment. You can see private sector investments are larger, but when you look at the composition that oil and gas really dominate very heavily in state-owned enterprises. That is unfortunate because state-owned enterprises have a lot of advantages actually when it comes to financing. I mean, we know that there are problems with making them always work effectively, but they, on the whole, and this is work we have done on looking at the cost of issuance and how much of fundraising the SVs do, and they are potentially very powerful tool to move this transition and this new infrastructure wave. And state-owned financial institutions are also very important. And here one should think very broadly about national development banks. Most countries have them now, and I think to make them work effectively, it's going to be very important. Having them work with the multilateral development banks like AIB, I think is a very important way forward. Sovereign wealth funds, again, have been very hesitant going into infrastructure because of the nature of infrastructure, very long-term, not so liquid and so on. We need to find ways of engaging them more effectively. And I think there are some very good ideas on the table. Central banks have become, quite important for driving the net zero transition in many countries, both in advanced economies, in developing economies, and that is using the central banks to put pressure on the financial sector to look at their carbon exposures, and in turn force them to look at what can we do to in our clients to bring down the carbon footprint. Very important. And of course, the state-owned financial institutions can also become very important partners of the private sector, given their lower funding costs and maybe more long-term funding perspective. So here again, SVs and state-owned financial institutions need to go from laggards to leaders, away from fossil fuel, be part of greening value chains. We're not talking just about individual companies, but their whole value chains, and are so important in Asia. And making that happen is going to be absolutely essential. And of course, almost every investment in these value chains is somehow related to infrastructure, whether it's transport, whether it's power, making sure that and digital, of course, is extremely important, increasingly important for transferring all this information along the value chain. So making sure that happens in a green way, and encouraging countries to use these opportunities to green the economy, to attract these investments from global value chains that have been so important for many countries in Asia. And I think here SVs and public banks can help also to coordinate across value chains. There's another problem, that these value chains are often, they are in some ways quite narrow, but we need to get coordination around cities, around special economic zones and so on. Here, SVs and public banks can be very important. Governance reform is obviously critical, and mobilizing private capital is critical. Maybe I'll say just a few words about what I mentioned, state capacity. So I think there are three elements that are important. So it's about the credibility, about making sure that the government can commit to the longer term that is so important for infrastructure. It's about benchmarking, getting best practices. You're all familiar with this, and reforming SVs and state-owned financial institutions. And very importantly, reducing fossil fuel subsidies, because today this is going against what you want to achieve in terms of the net zero transition. And that's probably the single most important item you can have. But we know how politically difficult this is, but it is going to be critical for success. Coordination, making sure that you have some capacity to monitor the overall process of progress and both inform and monitor implementation. Create some independent body, climate change council, net zero council, something like that helps you keep track and absorb and present new ideas and so on. And very important to look at the whole value chain and not just at the individual factory, but look at what can we do along the value chains, and obviously, educating the public. And then, as I mentioned, expertise, finding dedicated institutions for green technology adoption. So really concentrating the resources where you best need them to harness the private sector, and working with LDBs for technologies and skills. Let me end with one example that I think is a good example of what one can do. It's not from Asia, strictly speaking, even though part of Egypt is in Asia. I'm thinking of Sinai, but I think it's a good, interesting model. They created something called NUEFI, which is the nexus for water, food, and energy. And what they did was that they created this platform where they put all their pipeline of renewable projects, solar and wind, but they also put very concrete projects around phasing out fossil fuels on the same platform. They told their partners, the international development partners, EBRD, EIB, that we are willing to work, and we want to work on these different investment, different projects, and you can come in and decide how you want to work. But also very important for the private sector to see, where is this country going? What are the key opportunities for the private sector? Maybe working with MDBs, creating that transparency is very important. And as part of this, they have managed to attract concessional finance from the US for the transition compensation. So this transitioning out of fossil fuels and re-educating workers, and maybe some early retirement and so on. All that has been contributing finance from the US. Perhaps even more interesting is the fact that under this sort of NUEFI, Egypt agreed to increase its commitment under the Paris Agreement. And as long as it stays with this increased commitment, it will get this debt more cheaply from Germany. So it's a kind of performance-linked debt instrument from Germany. And it's a way for the Egyptian government to say, we are very serious about these enhanced commitments, and we are willing to take the risk of having higher costs for finance in the future if we don't live up to these commitments. And so that's a very good way of signaling. Finally, because they have made this transparent to the private sector, there is now FDI actually in wind power in Egypt, and that's been a key issue, as you know, to really get more of these investments in technologies in the countries to have local production and so on. And by creating this visibility, Egypt has achieved that. So just to summarize, when we're talking about this net zero moonshot, there is no contradiction between economic growth, energy security, and climate. It really is about reducing Asia's fossil fuel print will be key to energy security, taking advantage of these vast resources of renewable energy. Most reforms need to be needed. They will also benefit economic growth. These reforms of state-owned enterprises, state-owned financial institutions will help economic growth, will promote energy security, will help climate mitigation. Of course, there will be occasionally trade-off, but most, I would say, are things that will promote both the sustainable development, broadly infrastructure development, economic growth, and climate. And as I said in my initial remark, building state capacity must be part of infrastructure investment. So when we think about an infrastructure investment, we need to take into account, what is the capacities that are needed from the state. You transfer renewable resources, that you need to adjust the grid to absorb this renewable solar, wind, and so on. You need to have a regulatory framework that encourages and makes sure that this happens in the right way and so on. So these are, we need to think much more broadly, and AIB certainly is trying to do that now to make sure that we provide these resources and these projects with responsibility. And of course, we need to maintain openness to trade and investment in these global value chains, and anything that sort of risks these global value chains is bad for growth in Asia. So we must find ways to use all these opportunities to bring down the footprint of these global value chains to encourage growth in Asia. So I stop there. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm very happy to answer questions and engage in discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. Maybe a couple of things as follow-up. We all love some figures, and I don't know, would you have some figures for us when we look at the investment? Can we compare in any way the investment in infrastructure in a business as usual scenario and investments in sustainable infrastructure? Do you have any figures for us?
I haven't posed a question like that. I know that there's, we're talking about very large amounts of money that are needed to achieve this transition. We're talking about maybe $1 trillion per year, something like that. But I don't have what it is relative to what we do today. What is very clear, though, that it's quite a lot more than what we have already. So that's why we need to get flows from the outside, and the kind of framework that I described is to make it more likely that countries will receive these funds.
But do you see in any way an acceleration at scale when it comes to investment in sustainable infrastructure? I mean, it is clear that infrastructure.
Yeah. So I think that, for example, now there's a commitment from the MDBs to triple their investment in green finance, and we have quite specific, careful methods and jointly agreed methods for measuring green financing or climate. We call it climate finance, and so we have committed to. EIB has committed to be 50% climate finance by 2025. We are actually already there, and we were looking at by 2030 we should have a volume about 3 times the amount of climate finance to what we have today, and altogether we would probably have something like 50 billion in climate finance by then.
Thank you very much, and thank you for agreeing to stay with us through the public-private partnership discussion. But before I move to Dr. Samartunga, advisor to the President of Sri Lanka on the issue of public-private partnerships, I might take maybe 1 or 2 questions or commentaries from the floor. If we don't have any, we move directly to PPPs. Okay, so I'll just follow up maybe with 1 question that I had for Eric, and then we go to Dr. Samartunga straight away. But Eric, you mentioned climate performance linked debt. How widespread is it, and how useful is it, and do you find that it is used properly, regularly? How does it work, and if you have any advice if people want to go in that direction? But I'm really interested to know, is it picking speed as one of the mechanisms?
So I think it's a very interesting area. So it's I think in a way a whole new way of thinking about conditionality, and it because it's based on things that countries want to do anyhow and agree to do themselves, and this is a way to signal to the markets, to the potential providers of debt, or even potentially equity or some mixture of that, is to use this to signal that if we don't live up to these commitments, we will have a more expensive debt, or we will lock out from opportunities in the future to get access to this kind of debt. It's still, I would say, on a relatively small scale, but a number of countries in Uruguay, Chile, um, Barbados. Slightly different. They have done debt for nature swaps, and Belize have done that too. I gave this example of Germany and Egypt. So we are really talking about relatively early stages, but my sense is that this is something that can really grow very, very fast. And one of the reasons why this is potentially very powerful is that in the climate space, we have very clear agreements on what and clear metrics of what needs to be part of some kind of financial contract like this. So that makes it much easier to put forward contracts and have them signed and have them monitored. And so that's why I think this is a very interesting idea. But I also, this other idea of debt for climate or debt for nature swaps are also very interesting, where so Belize, for example, against commitments to take care of some resources that were viewed as sort of important for global biodiversity and global environment, they managed to exchange some very expensive debt that they had. And I think that is an important part of this as well. And maybe a last point is on I mentioned local currency, and here I think there are a lot of ideas now on the table on how to make sure that we get much more of this debt financed in local currency. Of course, that is important not only because we don't want to have large debt exposures, but also because most of the revenues that you get in the power sector or transports and so on are in local currency. So you get a mismatch, and you don't want this kind of mismatches in currency. So yet another reason why we want to develop this. So there was in the UN General Assembly Climate Week a couple of weeks ago, at least 3 and maybe 4 different ideas that I think now will be taken forward that can help countries get more access to local currency finance, which I think for many countries is very important.
Thank you very much, Eric. Now it is my pleasure to introduce again Dr. Samartunga, who's advising the Sri Lankan head of state and government, but also in Sri Lanka's very special position with us here, hosting and leading our talks in Asia-Pacific region. Tell us more about PPPs. You've been working on finance quite extensively. I think it is one of the topics where you can give us a lot of insights. There's been different models of PPPs, some work, some don't. There are evolving models of PPPs about the challenges and the opportunities, especially maybe from Sri Lanka's point of view, but also from the Asia-Pacific perspective. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will talk very briefly about PPP in general, public-private partnership, and turn my speech into Sri Lanka's context subsequently. PPP schemes in Asia has been a growing industry during the last 2 decades. Growing investment demands in Asia are met from variety of sources. Of course, the government tax revenue, FDIs, multilateral financial institutions. The newest scheme is PPP, and it's growing. It is now recognized as a successful alternative funding method. Traditionally, PPP have been in highways, transport, ports, and energy. In general, these are the areas where we saw the lot of PPP programs. But subsequently, evolved into embrace many other sectors in the economy. PPPs are goods and service deliveries based on shared risk between government and the private sector. As these programs are new, evolving, and moved into embrace new sectors, governments have come across 2 capacity-related issues in general, namely, when PPP programs are implemented, technical capacities of the government institutions which are working in the areas of public-private partnership. These are new areas. Therefore, the government or the private sector doesn't have, do not have, the sufficient capacities to work, institutional capacities to work on. Second capacity issue is the legal and risk management, very, very important key areas which guarantees, which make, the PP program successful or otherwise. Legal and risk management associated with PP program. Many countries do not have, the good legal schemes and risk management schemes to work with PPP programs. These are in general, what I have observed over the PPP programs in general. Now I turn to, the Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka story is somewhat closer to, what I have just been, told. But I have to tell you, the sort of background story at the moment before going into the PPP program. Sri Lanka is currently going through a very difficult economic phase. GDP has contracted as much as 7.8% in 2022. The first 2 quarters of 2023 have also reported negative growth. Many sectors of the economy have now been not performing very well. BOP ran into varieties of difficulties, forcing government to restrict imports and also payment restriction as well. External reserves, foreign reserves have dropped to near zero levels. Budget deficit has been in double digits in the recent years. Inflation has been rising and came to all-time high, 70% September last year. SMEs were the hardest hit. Increased poverty levels, widespread shortages of imported goods, much more the country-wide social discontent. In this context, Sri Lanka has sought IMF assistance and now implements a 4-year extended EFF program 2023-2026. We see from early part of this year, there have been some improvements. Inflation has come down to near zero level in September last month. Restriction on imports and external payments are now being eased. Forex reserves are growing, albeit at a very slower pace. Product shortages have basically disappeared. We hope that from the second half of this year, from third quarter and fourth quarter, country will record, the positive economic growth. Sri Lanka has had, about 35% of level of GDP in investment. Its government share or the contribution has been, 5 to 6%. These are general figures. Both these percentages have come down drastically in the midst of recent economic difficulties. Sri Lanka has a long history of implementing public-private partnership programs in developing their infrastructure. 90s and the first decades of 2000, Sri Lanka has seen about 73 PPP projects according to World Bank numbers with the total investment about 6 billion. At the beginning of 1990s, an entity under the Board of Investment is the one which the central agency which coordinates and promotes foreign investment in this country. They created a new entity under the BOI, Board of Investment, called Bureau of Infrastructure Investment, BII, which start promoting PPP programs in 1990s. To help that, government has created new PPP guidelines in 1998, made part of the country's overall procurement program. On the acceptance of PPP being a successful alternative funding method at the national level, strategic plan adopted for lifting of infrastructure has gained considerable progress in PPP programs in the last 2 decades. Generally, the government of Sri Lanka has recognized that the private sector can play a dynamic role in accelerating growth and developing infrastructure projects. Therefore, is committed to promoting PPP in general. The policy framework emphasizes the PPP as a successful alternative funding method. For example, Sri Lanka has already implemented PPP projects, very successfully implemented PPP projects in key sectors like power sector. Closer to Colombo, 163 megawatt power plant was built under PPP program, and also little away from Colombo, 100 megawatt power plant was also built on a PPP program. In the port sector, Sri Lanka has developed the project South Asia Gateway Terminal, which is considered as a very successful project in Sri Lankan standards. Government of Sri Lanka has identified private sector participation and financing on PPP mode as the key to achieving accelerated recovery and promotion of economic growth, for which the new and improved infrastructure is a must. Given the current situation, government has thought that to invite PPP kind of programs to complement what government has officially been put as investment. Given the present constraint faced in the fiscal sector, the revenues have gone down because with the contraction of the economy as well. PPP program would be an alternative way forward for building infrastructure, not only now, also in the future as well. It is understood that the enabling legal, regulatory and institutional structure impacting PPP implementation must be in place in order to successfully develop and implement PPP projects and to promote confidence in investors that their interests and the rights are rightfully protected. In the past, Sri Lanka did not have a strong enabling PPP environment. Although PPP unit was established in the Ministry of Finance in 2017, it was abandoned later. The present government is very keen on strengthening PPP's legal, regulatory and institutional setting. Accordingly, new agency for public-private partnership was set up in September 2022. The NAPP is now in the process of developing legal infrastructure, both for the PPP agency and programs, and also developing its institutional arrangements. The program to be undertaken under the new NAPP go beyond the traditional sectors, port, the energy, power and energy sectors, to embrace many new sectors such as education, health, roads, water, waste management, social services, etc., etc. However, it should be noted that the country's capacity in this respect, technical, legal, regulatory, institutional, is very limited, and noted that should be enhanced and strengthened based on PPP's best practices elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Samatunga. Any questions or comments from the floor at this point? Or do we perhaps proceed given time? And I thank Dr. Samatunga and Eric for being part of this discussion, but we will continue discussion. What I want you to do is to listen to the private sector, and then we open the floor, because it will allow us to get two different perspectives. So we are looking at what we call setting shop in Asia Pacific. Sustainable infrastructure as barrier and opportunity. And for this segment, we are focusing to some extent at direct foreign investment. We are looking at the international companies and the different criteria they look at, the facilitations they need in order to come and set shop in the region. And we are asking a lot of questions, so we've shared that before, but the key question I would look at is, what are the infrastructure factors that impact foreign direct investment decisions and expansion of the multinational companies in the Asia-Pacific region? And I would like to start with MasterCard. Koki, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Shereen. Good afternoon again, everyone. So without a doubt that increasingly corporate investment decisions are indeed taking into account longer-term socio-economic potential of a particular country, which incidentally also incorporates environmental impact, right? Beyond just economic growth or purchasing power for the goods and services that the company produces. It is still a journey, right? I think we all have to acknowledge that, but we feel that the initiatives are underway. And companies are balancing sustainability development goals while pursuing financial results. At MasterCard, we have established clear ESG goals aligned with our internal and external stakeholders. For example, DEI, or diversity, equity and inclusiveness, as well as net zero, are important internal goals that we have committed to. And at the same time, we have also made public our intention to enable financial inclusion goals up to 1 billion people and 50 million SMEs for financial inclusion, right, in the coming years. Particularly in our work with the public sector partners, we consider the potential to help governments accelerate digitalization of their socio-economic development goals across the spectrum of digital readiness. I believe earlier on we have heard a speaker from the UN that talks about digitalization as a critical enabler, right, for more sustainable development. And likewise, we share that view. So in this case, we adapt our approach when we work with governments at a relatively initial or mid stage of digitalization. We emphasize more on increasing access, ensuring that the government's digital services, right, are being provided to as many people as possible in the population, as well as to ensure that businesses will also benefit from it, right? And this could be an example of government's aid and grant program, industry development stimulus, right? And the point here is really to ensure that the governments are laying the foundation for digitalization. For those, for countries that are, I would say more digitally ready, right? Governments which are more digitally advanced, we bring solutions to deepen their engagement with various constituents. So examples such as cross-vertical synergies, right? Earlier on with Minister Mansoor, we've talked about the intersection between public transportation and environmental sustainability. Indeed, that is exactly one example where we work with transit authorities to make public transit more accessible, more convenient, and in fact, I will even add, right, more engaging. So whether it is, for example, us working with Transport for New South Wales in Australia, or with EasyLink and LTA in Singapore, these transit authorities, they have already gone what we call in our parlance open loop payment, i.e. you use a MasterCard and you can actually pay at the bus terminal or at the train station gantry, right? And the same card could then be used beyond transit. So the whole point of this is not just to promote payment, but rather to create behavioral change, to encourage behavioral change that in turn, right, transit authorities can then bring in other ways to engage, including their concession fare, including lining up partners that will provide other economic promotional activities. Now, all this obviously creates, or the intent is to create a virtuous cycle that enable more participants to become financially and digitally included in the digital ecosystem. Now, I would like to call upon a partner that we work very closely with from the Port City Colombo Economic Commission, Mr. Raymond Wickramasuriya, who is the Director of Financial Services and Compliance, to share a little bit about the perspective exactly on this public-private partnership, particularly as the Commission is working on building a sustainable smart city that will be the future of Port City Colombo. Over to you, Mr. Raymond.
And a reminder, please, to keep to time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And yeah, my name is Revan. I'm from the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Office. The Commission, and touching on from what Dr. Samaratunga touched on PPP projects, the Colombo Port City project is to date the largest PPP project the government of Sri Lanka has ever ventured on in its 75 years since independence. It's estimated to be a $15 billion project when fully completed. It is a city that is being built, right? We have recently partnered with MasterCard to address the possibilities of developing it as a smart city. We expected to have a total built up gross flow area of approximately 6.3 million square meters, right? From residential, low-rise residential to high-rise mixed-use commercial development. And there is a drive and focus to see how this city that is going to entertain or maintain about 300,000 people, how can it be developed and built in an environmentally friendly structure. The development control regulations, which is effectively the building code recently passed by Parliament, recently as 2 weeks ago, gives an incentive structure for developers who are looking to build the vertical construction in an environmentally, socially acceptable, sustainable manner and get some sort of a LEED certification, and or looking at structuring the green space by more than 50% that has been actually designed. Should they meet these development control requirements, the gross flow area can be increased by up to 5%. So there is a significant incentive for them to try and ensure their building meets the LEED certification standards. Over and above that, when you look at the city, as I mentioned, with MasterCard, we're looking at creating an environmentally friendly ecosystem where motor or the vehicular movement is minimized. It is all sort of work to and from work, walk to and from work, walk to and from your schools, your hospitals, the social infrastructure, etc. So this is, we believe that this would be some sort of a pilot project for the government of Sri Lanka where they can see the success of this city and then try and replicate the benefits of that to the broader Sri Lankan economy.
Thank you very much. And again, on the issue of infrastructure factors that impact foreign direct investment, I'll go to Tora Liefland, Volvo Group.
Thank you very much, Shereen. So I'd like to start with, I'll come back to your question directly, but I'd like to start with just quickly revisiting the discussion we had on regulation before lunch, because that also links into this private-public cooperation. And then the question was policy or product first. And in our industry, we, the private sector, drive the development of new electric, autonomous, or hydrogen-powered solutions. So just let me be clear, we're not expecting government to eliminate all business risk. We take the investment risk, and we can actually, because of the size of our company in our industry, we can actually help drive demand in certain sectors, similar to what government are trying to do with green public procurement. So this was the case, for example, with fossil-free steel, where we were the first in our industry to demand this product, and now there is a market coming. But when we see that there is a demand in the market, then we need policy to help accelerate and to enable this. And we use this expression, I mentioned it before, partnership is the new leadership, and we see that we really need to collaborate with public sector to be successful here. And the Lights project that I highlighted before is an example of a private-public partnership where we worked with the state of California and to update some regulation, and we were able to commercialize and quicker put heavy-duty battery electric trucks on the market. We've also had pilot cases in Singapore and Korea, so this is clearly an arena where we think we can do much more. I also highlighted charging infrastructure before, so that plays into the whole infrastructure topic. We see also some bottlenecks in regulation between different countries. For example, Korea has a vehicle width regulation stipulating 2.5 meters. Many other countries have 2.55. These kind of differences, then the countries that deviate runs the risk of being excluded from new electric offerings and so on. And I think just finishing off a general reflection, your question there about investment risk, it's so complex and it depends on the market and everything. But one thing that we see in terms of ESG requirements from our stakeholders, from investors, is that for us as a global company, it's increasingly important to be able to do sustainability due diligence across the entire value chain. For example, human rights due diligence, both in sourcing and in sales. And I think this is a factor that will grow over time.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll go right to Deloitte and their perspective on the issue of infrastructure. I remind you of time.
I'd like to commence with some notable things happened at the Sri Lankan market very recently. One is on the banking sector, which the central bank has issued direction to the banks and a guideline to the financial institutions, which encourage for the banking sector is a mandatory requirement to consider raising funds where instruments such as green sustainable bonds and allocate those to the investment in sustainable activities. So the financing market, it's ensuring like though the funds are to be flowing the sustainable projects. And also in the capital market perspective, recently the Colombo Stock Exchange has launched the green bonds. And that also kind of the platform which is available for investors to invest in the sustainable indirectly in the sustainable activities. So that's two platforms are available in the Sri Lankan context, and it's a good initiative. But having discussion with certain regulators and with the Colombo Stock Exchange recently, we found that still certain knowledge sharing is required in the country at the moment. So I believe a sort of knowledge exchanges should have to be happening between the countries belonging to the Asia Pacific. So that is one important thing. And also when it's come to the FDI, which is flowing the financial resources from one country to the other. So that is also can be happen between the region, within the region, between the countries, and also can from other regions all over the world. And that context, I think sometimes the legislations which are currently operating in the Sri Lankan market or probably in the countries in the Asia Pacific has to be relooked. And we have to do sort of after the enactment of certain legislation and all to do a post-implementation reviews most of the time to get the kind of feedback from the industry and from the investors, and to have a relook whether any amendments or the alterations required. So that is most important. And also the tax legislations, which can play a bigger role by encouraging the investment towards the sustainable activities and also the discouraging which the money flowing into the unsustainable activity. So that can be done. And also the government can also consider about the introducing certain educational programs towards creating green collar jobs. Now it's having the green collar jobs, the jobs are moving towards that. So more environment-friendly jobs are happening. So to have to educate them, that will help the businesses to get that resources into their businesses when they come in as foreign direct investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll open the floor in a second, but before that, I would like to go to the Cook Islands and just to look at the issue of infrastructure investment, public-private partnerships. And I'm very pleased to welcome Tiriapi Maki Kavana, Associate Minister for National Environmental Services, the Cook Islands.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and my environment authorities to participate in this prestigious forum. And we extend our appreciation and gratitude to the government and people of Sri Lanka for hosting the 5th Forum of Ministers and Environment Authorities of the Asian Pacific region. I also thank UNEP and the UNSPBF for facilitating this forum and giving us the opportunity to participate. The Cook Islands, like many small island developing states, are grappling with the catastrophic impact of climate change due to our severe vulnerabilities. Significant environmentally sustainable forms of economic development. The urgency of green structural transformation for SIDS is critical, as ecological sustainability informs economic sustainability. My government has launched the Cook Islands Economic Development Strategy 2030 with our fifth objective to greening our economy. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to reset our path, bringing sustainability as centerpiece of our economic agenda. The transition to a green economy requires making investments trade-off between short-term high-growth policies that may not be sustainable over the long term, and more environmentally sustainable policies that might involve a lower rate of growth in the short term. Some examples of our policies include enhanced accelerated tax depreciation, which aims to encourage private sector investment in environmentally sustainable assets. Our Smart Agri-Tech scheme provides our opportunity to reduce farming's environmental footprint through new technology to mitigate climate change impacts, and our transition to a low carbon economy through accessing affordable clean energy. While our policies are facilitating this green transformation, we are challenged by the lack of economies of scale as small island developing states. We have labor shortage limited and available housing capacity constraint. Inequitable sharing of economic growth benefits and range of environmental issues of increasing concern as tourism-dependent nation, particularly solid waste and sanitation management. We have a resilient private sector that we supported during the COVID-19 pandemic with economic stimulus packages. Our post-recovery is tracking well as our tourism industry has bounced back to where it was before pandemic. Our business sector's top asks are to facilitate labor policies to address the labor shortage issue, but most importantly is their support for a green economy. We are measuring progress to increase the percentage of electricity generation from renewable energy to 60% by 2030, increase the energy use efficiency in the Cook Islands, increase the recycling rate 75% by 2030, and increase the percentage of properties with approved sanitation schemes to 85% by 2030. Our relationship with financial institutions is strong, with significant investments in sustainable infrastructure going through some environmental approval and due diligence. We continue to work with our Pacific peers on realizing commitments for climate finance and recognizing the special circumstances of small island developing states, especially in climatic disasters or unprecedented situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll come back. We have some questions for you. I want to see if we have any show of hands on the floor. All right, so the discussion on infrastructure continues, and I am taking your leave with a little bit of flexibility, given some disruption today to the schedule. But I would like, if that's okay with everyone, as we talk about PPPs and as we talk about infrastructure, I'd like to get into the issue of circularity, simply because the flow of the conversation is kind of going in that direction. And then, of course, we have energy and digitization, which we will also cover. But let me start with Tomra, and I want to perhaps ask the question to Gargi Parikh, representing Tomra Systems today with us as well, on how do we build strong foundations for circularity and a circular economy in terms of infrastructure in Asia Pacific, from your experience.
Thank you, Shereen, and very pertinent, I would say, with Tomra, considering we are a technology company and we hinge on green infrastructure to be developed for selling that technology. The cornerstone, however, to, as you know, we've been discussing since morning, the cornerstone to having this green infrastructure, at least in Asian nations, hinges a lot on how the policy is structured. We've seen that from various nations, India being one example where primarily I'm working. And policy support from the government really attracts that investments. Also the fact on how the implementation is done by the government, because we know that implementation being weak takes away the trust from the government on how the policy is actually implemented, and hence the infrastructure will never really come about, or the investment is not going to be viable in future, etc. So the role of the government in communication and implementation, we feel, is one of the large considerations that we need to look at. Also, I think Anupa mentioned in the discussion earlier, the reporting and the accountability on how the government is looking at this aspect too is another important part of how we will really succeed or not in that part. In addition to this, financing, and I think in the last half an hour we've all spoken about how financing is going to be important. There are three aspects I feel that we should be talking about. One is in Asia, and especially in countries where we know that economics is a challenge at this point, how creative solutions can be made for financing that green infra. I will give a very quick example. In India, we have been talking about sales of EV. The price of EV versus a regular vehicle is very different, at least 20-25% sometimes. So we've come up with a solution where the battery is leased out, but the vehicle is sold to you. So you're leasing out the battery, which is probably the most important part of that equipment. So when you lease out that, and it's a monthly subscription or whichever way you formulate it, so creative solutions for financing will change how we really set up green infrastructure. We have different aspects in solar because it's been going on for 2 decades now. Another point which I think Anupa also spoke about, how long-term is the focus on financing. If it is short-term, if we are just, especially in the business that we are in, plastics and in waste, etc., if it is just funded for beach cleanups, if it is only funded by incentives given by brands or other various private sector companies, it's not sustainable. How long-term is it? Are we looking at the profitability, self-sustaining of that business? So these 3 points in financing, I feel, are kind of cornerstones to it. Also defining role of stakeholders in different businesses. How is private sector going to contribute? Imagine plastics. The way that private sector or brand owners or various industries or various other consumer product companies, their role in the global north in developed countries is very different from how they have been playing a role in collection or sorting or even cleanups in Asian nations. That has to change. That narrative slowly will change. And once that happens, we will see how suddenly we do have infrastructure. This also will hinge a lot on policy aspects. How do consumers behave? That part also, if we can redefine that, that will change again on how business and economics can happen. We also talk a lot on this. When we are setting up green infrastructure in the global south, in developing nations, the social sector inclusion, that's important. Green jobs, I think we had mentioned from 2 other speakers on how green jobs are now going to be the new key important element in when we are talking about economic development of a nation. So both these, social sector and job creation, can change again how private sector investments can happen, how public sector also will invest or not. in that particular field. And last, I would just say, you know, at Tomra, we really like to talk about this. What really are we talking about with circularity? And especially in plastics or various other material streams that we talk about. Are we really looking at that material, that particular plastic or whichever material talking about, going back into the plastic and going back into the circular loop and coming back into that product, or are we downcycling it and hence reducing the lifespan and the end of life coming closer? So I think those 4-5 are key considerations that we usually speak about.
As follow-up, this is a huge region, and Tomra is working all over the world. You have a big operation in, for example, India. Do you find that the factors that you've just listed, that you've just shared with us, they apply to least developed countries, to small island developing states, as much as to some of the regional giants like India or China or Australia?
I feel Asia in general, each country needs customization. And like I mentioned, especially in financing, which probably is the biggest challenge in green infrastructure for our nations. But creatively, for every country, we need to find a different solution. I gave you an example of battery leasing, for example. These need to be done. But yes, India may be in a very different position as compared to few other island nations where the population is smaller and the demand is different and financing is very different. In some of these places, I believe that at least kickstarting investments with development aid, kickstarting investments as incentives or etc. could even work. But yes, I believe it has to be very different, customized for each region.
Thank you very much. And we always appreciate to have science and academia in our midst. It's the Science Policy Business Forum. So I'm very happy to introduce Professor Thusita Sugampala, a senior lecturer at the University of Moratawa in Sri Lanka. Just to share, do you have something to add to what was said today? And do we have models that we need to follow or lessons learned?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, I think some of the main topics have been covered, but I want to bring few other topics. Like when we talk about this circular economy in the local context, this has been highlighted repeatedly in some of the key policy intervention like net zero target by 2050, National Environment Action Plan, many of such policies. So what we see there is basically, of course, there are actions which are like a wish list, but when you go into the details, when it's going to have ground level implementation, there are some issues we now see. One of the issues is the technology transfer and also technology ownership, IP rights. We are not very clear how it's going to happen there. For example, some of the resources like renewables, of course, resource is us, but the technology is not with us. So when you're targeting for 70% by 2030 and 100% renewables by 2050, what about the technology ownership? So we don't have a foundation to address that. We don't know the legal aspect. We are very weak on that. Negotiations, we are going to fail. So that's one aspect. Other aspects basically also linked to the digitization aspect also, like even the capacity. So when you look at some of the technologies, when you look at the readiness levels, we see that we are not ready. Although we promote policy level.
How can we get ready?
So basically, when you look at the, for example, competency, we look into 3 areas basically. One thing is whether the institutions are ready, institutions. So we need evolving institutions. We have very conventional institutions in general. So those institutions has to be evolved to suit the times. So that's one thing. Secondly, the competency of the actors, the staff, operational level as well as strategic level. We also have gap there. And also we have gaps in the society itself. We don't have a knowledgeable society to cope up with these changes. These are transformational changes. We have a fear of change, basically. So we have a real challenge for this transformation. So I just want to highlight those things without wasting much time. I think there are areas we have to be worried a lot to gain on sustainable level. So renewable alone is not sustainable. So we have to look into other areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very efficient with time. We thank you. I'd like to go now to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I don't know if Rohita is here. No, but maybe, yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. So about the transition to a circular economy, Rohita Silva is Vice President of the Federation of Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Sri Lanka.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. how I would look at this is to convert. There is always waste. There's never a point where you won't have waste. Let us convert this to a business opportunity, financial opportunity. Then I think we will drive everybody around. Net zero and renewable energy. If you take Sri Lanka, it's simply the most easiest thing is to develop solar energy for urban development, industries, and the commercial aspect of it. So it's everyone makes money out of it. It's a business model, and probably the government president's advisor is there. You could look at how do we, I don't believe in PPP. I think we need to look at how the private sector drive this, because government is currently not in the best level of finances, but I'm sure the private banking can come into this. Waste management. I'm delighted to sit next to one of them. So the wastes, like the garbage, the plastics, all that has a purpose of it, which we can recycle. So that's another area I think which Sri Lanka can look at it, and everybody can look at it. The food waste. Food recycling is not even thought of in most of our countries, especially in Sri Lanka. There's a lot of value into it, and which we can do. Can we live really fast, paperless, which again a business model going IT based. So I think everything needs to be looked at in a business angle of it, so that the private sector would invest. So I think foundation to this is look at, we all know the problem, we have spoken the problem for years, we all have theories, we all have everything in place. I would recommend you to do the education part of it from tertiary upwards, plus convert all this into business models. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I will start the bit on digitization. I mean, we heard from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, we heard from many others on digitization being a cornerstone of the modern economy. And maybe, Dr. Samatunga, if you don't mind, I will put you on the spot. And I'll just ask, do we have any idea at all during the COVID era, to what extent do we think, maybe, I don't know if we have figures, but at least from a general perception, to what extent did Sri Lanka, maybe another question is the region, and I'm also, maybe, our colleagues from the UN could assist. Do we know to what extent the digital economy, especially maybe in Sri Lanka, in other developing nations in the region, least developed countries, to what extent did the digital economy take up? Did it boom? Did it not?
Just to respond to, I don't have a full answer, but during the COVID time, we had a very successful operation in restricting petroleum use in this country by using the QR code. Even those who haven't had any association with mobile phones, quickly converted into this program, and with no complaints, and the operations were island-wide very successful, and also the situation was also in general eased. That was one of the successful operations. I just want to tell you the digitization program now being considered at the moment. Its value has been I think understood by everybody, and the efficiency gain that we could have, government is on a very recovery mode, working with various policies as well. By first quarter of next year, all the government operations, the money operations, visit as well as the dispensation should be online. The government, our government is a very large government, Sri Lanka government, which has about 1,300 agencies with over 15 lakhs of people, and everybody has to be online when it comes to visits and payment from the government. This second thing is that the digitization, as we have seen from the experiences, the efficiency gain is enormous, and given the situation that we are experiencing at the moment, the economy is not in good shape, and we see that toward the end of the year, toward the end of the year, the economy will be recovering and positive growth will be there. To complement that one, the government is on the developing digitalization framework for both for the participation of private sector and the government. It's at the very elementary level. Toward the end of the year, probably we'll see the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'd like to go to Brian Sathyantan, founder and chief digital officer of Iterate AI. It's a company that is originated in Silicon Valley, actually, with very strong roots here in Sri Lanka. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you, esteemed colleagues and delegates. It gives me a great pleasure to be here. My name is Brian Sathyanathan, a serial entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, born here in Sri Lanka. I'm the founder of an artificial intelligence company called Iterate.ai, which is in the forefront of digital transformation globally. We firmly believe that AI can usher in a new era of efficiency and new capabilities for environmental sustainability. Throughout this session, we've discussed myriad challenges in the Asia-Pac region regarding environmental sustainability. Each and every one of you grapples with these challenges every day. As we work towards sustainability, it's imperative to assess existing resources, right, at our disposal to expedite our objectives. I would respectfully propose that you contemplate the following avenues. First, the use of artificial intelligence. AI is bringing radical new efficiencies throughout the world economy. AI is advancing several areas of sustainability. Farmers use AI for precision farming, which allows them to optimize water usage and minimize spraying of fertilizers and pesticides. AI is optimizing electricity grids to match production demands, increasing feasibility and impact of renewable energy. On the consumer side, computer vision systems are making recycling more efficient, economical, empowering sorting machines with single-stream recycling facilities. Additionally, large amounts of environmental data can be connected and interpreted in human understandable forms via generative AI. Here in South Asia, several technology startups or SMEs are applying artificial intelligence to sustainability. This brings us to my second point. Embracing startups and small enterprises. Startups are innovative, always at the cutting edge, have the ability to solve problems faster, and extremely capital efficient. Startups enable governments and the private sector to do more with less. They can become a catalyst that provides government with a head start to battle environmental issues. Please allow me to share some example. A startup company here in Sri Lanka is providing sustainable solutions to farmers. It gives recommendations to over 10,000 farmers with outcomes of using 30% less water, 25% less spraying, while increasing crop yields by 15%. All this is done through AI. Another example is an AI-optimized solar power plant integrated with edge computing, which has helped 22 power plants achieve over 30% increase in maintenance efficiency and reduce CO2 emissions by 70,000 tons annually. The above may be small at scale, but you will see such examples everywhere throughout Asia-Pac. The biggest challenge facing technology and democratization is younger generations will grow up in a world where AI will be everywhere. Our education system should give youth the tools to harness the power of AI for the benefit of their communities. I want to emphasize 3 action steps governments and private sector leaders should consider. Embrace the use of artificial intelligence, collaborate with private sector, startups, SME, and get a head start. Be very intentional with your actions plans. Leverage AI as a catalyst, open up data silos between various governmental bodies and the private sectors. Second, find, invest, and nurture startups and SMEs. Focus on using technology to combat environmental challenges. Third, create policies and educational programs to empower the youth to thrive in a new world where AI is everywhere. Our education system should give youth the tools to harness the power of AI and benefit our communities for environmental sustainability. To kind of close out on an encouraging note, I want you to remind you of the opening scene at Heathrow Airport from the movie of, for that matter, the Bandaranaike International Airport, from the movie Love Actually. I'm actually paraphrasing it. Whenever I get gloomy at the state of the world, I look at the gates at Heathrow Airport. General opinion states that we live in a world of hatred and greed, but I don't see that. It seems to me that love is everywhere, often not dignified or newsworthy, but it's there. Fathers and sons, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, old friends. If you look closely, you will find it everywhere. A similar philosophy applies to environmental sustainability. If you look closely, startups, SMEs, and individuals who are passionate and solving problems about sustainability are everywhere. You just got to look. They are the beacons of hope. Let's find, invest, nurture them. Let's amplify their light and pave the way for a sustainable tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. What an inspirational presentation. Very enjoyable. Thank you so much. And indeed, this applies, I think, to every aspect of life, but especially on how we handle the new opportunities, and especially also giving the opportunity to the SMEs, to the innovators amongst us, which also applies to policy. We need innovation, including in policy, to support work such as this. Thank you so much. I want to cover, linked also to digital and new technologies, and do forgive me that I am kind of moving as fast as I can because there's so much to cover, and I hope this was a 3-day meeting. It is a 1-day opportunity, and we are feeding a ministerial process, so such a great opportunity, and we need to hear from you. But I will go to the subject of energy again, revisiting that, and I want to go to Newlink, another SME that is growing very fast, an innovator from China. And we are looking at the future of energy transitions and how can sustainable energy transitions meet these demands that are growing very fast and that are still very much going towards fossil fuel, as we heard from Eric from the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank. How do we create the shifts? And how do we ensure that environmental sustainability remains at the heart of our energy consumption and energy needs? So I'll go to Newlink for their perspective.
Thank you, Shereen. Hello, everyone. My name is Yu Bozhai. I come from China, and our company named NAS, and under the group's management of Newlink. So our company is the largest EV charging service providers in China. So right now we have already connected almost 600,000 chargers into our network. So we developed these services to all the electrical vehicles, not just for the privates and also for some public utilizations. So today we talked more about the collaboration between the private and the public sectors in the financing issues. So I think I can show some examples that we developed in China, because we really work quite close with the policymakers and the resourcing and the financing resources. Because right now we are the largest one in China, but from the beginning we made a lot of difficulties, and we made the different companies, for example, the multilateral development bank, and also the national banks or the local commercial banks. Because right now in China, the policy, the green financing policy is very positive. And of course, in the context of energy transition, the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure systems is also very positive to develop. But when we start, we still made some difficulties. So firstly, we work quite close with the policies. So in one city named Anji in China, we work with the local government and the local commercial bank. So we get the green financing with the low interest rate of the loan. So how we can do that? So with the digital technology, because we developed one platform, we can trace all the information and this all kind of this data on this platform. Because right now, if you ask the bank, they also have some policies to encourage the green financing, but why still meet some difficulties? Because the bank always answer you that because they have not 100% confidence in this company or in this business, but still uses this digital platform. You can trust all this information and data to help people in the bank to have more confidence in your business and to get more resources from the bank side. Yeah, and also I think from our side, the green financing, we still have the different resources. Firstly, we get the investment from AIIB. So from our own company side, we make our transformation by our own side. For example, so we get the SBTI, which is the first Chinese EV charge companies in China to get approved by SBTI. And we also set the green ambition and green target. And by 2028, we will use 100% of green energy for the EV charging infrastructures manufacture. And we also have some operation, green operation by 2028. So all kind of this confidence and the green performance to show to the bank and the financing institutions to give you confidence, to give you the loan in with the low interest. And also we work quite close with the local commercial bank to get this investment to help us together to do this infrastructure. Yes. And from China, because some people think that right now China has the great experience, but we still have some lessons. Because at the beginning for the investment of the basic EV charging infrastructures, we invest a lot of money and lots of infrastructures. But in some city, the utilization rate of the EV chargers is less 5 to 10%. In some city, there are a lot of EV chargers, but in some cities, they don't have enough EV chargers to use. So finally, we use this technology, the digital technology of the hot map to help the local government together with us to develop, to build the chargers, to have a affordable and green and much easier for access for more people to use this network. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And from renewable energy innovators in China all the way to India, Forbes Marshall, we are very happy to have Loshan Palayangoda. The floor is yours.
Fine. Thank you very much. And I'm Loshan Palayangoda and I'm representing Forbes Marshall. We are a multinational with Indian roots, and we are there for 30 years in Sri Lanka, plus we are in 30 countries worldwide, focusing mainly on energy efficiency improvements in manufacturing sector and leisure sector. That is our main, bread and butter. And we are working with more than 300 entities in Sri Lanka, main energy consumers. So to focus them on energy reduction and implementation of energy efficiency activities. So we are making policies for them, and we are guiding them on how to grow one step at a time throughout the 3 years. So we as a company have a target to for each country, like Sri Lanka is, we normally say, is a matured market. So where we are representing for 30 years, and there are countries where we are representing less than 10 years. So those are immature markets. For matured markets, we are focused on 1.5% energy bill reduction year on year for next 3 years for industries. And then immature markets, we are focusing on 0.5 year on year for 1.5. So that's that is the level that we are in. And plus, we are the first to introduce digital dashboard consultancy during the COVID period for industries, where we were assisting them based upon their details, and we kept a pool of consultants from our team and to advise industries to reduce their energy consumption, as well as which leads to obviously for carbon footprint. So there were many discussions happen on financing and policy and all these activities which is really interest. So, but I'd like to insist what is available right now in the country. I'm just taking Sri Lanka as an example. Like we have these EPLs for each industry. We are giving all these licenses for betterment of the environment, and the ministries carry on with the Central Environment Authority. So we just like to propose as an institute or a company who's looking forward for more greener and more lucrative activities on that energy efficiency line. So to have at least this EPL is just a EPL at the moment. So we want to have at least a green EPL. So where the banks and other entities can identify such establishments. So those established can be financed for further improvements in their entities. So that is one thing that we would like to see as a country and to see forward, because that is already there. So it's a matter of implementing one or two initiatives or indicates to get the things in line. And plus, currently all the banks are having this first come first serve basis. So
Thank you.
Yeah, just one second. Just first come. That this way of working needs to be changed. That people who are practicing the sustainability, who are having all this GRI reporting or either sustainability reporting or national green reporting, should give the priority. So that should be the first way of going forward. That's what.
Thank you very much indeed. We are going to conclude this session with a panel discussion on financing, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Budi. But we are going to conclude this session with development cooperation, financing and support. And I would like to, and there is a huge difference between, I think we are going to discover it a little bit, demystifying the financing and the support, policy support and other types of support that development cooperation provides from the capital markets and how that work, which Budi is going to cover. But I would like to welcome Boudica Haporachi, and forgive me if my pronunciation is not great, lead climate and environment from the UN Development Program. Is she in the room? Not yet. She's coming a bit later. She's there. Wonderful. I want you to join me here, if that's okay. We mix it up a little bit. All right, so please do join me here. I'd like to also welcome, and please, if you're here, just let us know, Morgan Rohel, Project Manager of the EU Green Recovery Facility, and Sonali Salamutu, Country Representative of the Global Green Growth Institute. So please make your way right here. I would also like to welcome Rob Wing, who is Deputy Director of the Office of Environmental Quality, the US State Department, joining us all the way from Washington. We want to demystify development cooperation and its role in supporting sustainability, transformation, and infrastructure development in Asia Pacific, of course globally, but definitely the focus here is on Asia Pacific. So what are the boundaries, what are the opportunities, what are the barriers, and how do we contextualize the real value of development cooperation in a very changing environment? And I would like to start by UNDP.
Yeah, good afternoon. Just to clarify, my name is Vishaka Hidayalage. So Boudica and both Azusa and Boudica are not here, so I'm talking on behalf of them. Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion. So whatever we are going to talk about is there's so much of information has come up. From our perspective, sustainable as a key development partner working in Sri Lanka, globally, I guess the issue or the concept of sustainable infrastructure has yet to be fully recognized. It's not a concept that is well understood by the government, by private sector, banks, insurance, whatever. Of course, the sustainability, unfortunately, good part of it is that sustainability is gaining recognition with NDCs and other initiatives. It's recognized that move towards sustainability is required. But when it comes to infrastructure, yes, the mitigation, the solar power plants, the wind power plants, that kind of infrastructure, reduction of GHG emission is talked, and it is included within our NDCs, which is very good, positive opportunity for us. But I guess the challenge is, do we understand what is sustainable infrastructure? And when we understand, I mean, the private sector, we talked a lot about sustainable infrastructure, but when it comes to, we know the negotiation, based on some of the negotiation we had with the private sector in the recently, or it's ongoing negotiations, I would say, when it comes to something new, even when you understand, it's not easy for anybody to invest on it, right? So there is a risk. When you add the risk component, if the bank says, private sector says, yes, we will take part of the risk. Bank says, yes, we will also take part of the risk. Insurance companies take part of it, but the bulk risk finally be transferred to the people, right? So in Sri Lanka, for example, I can give you, I mean, we don't have much time. So the challenge, I guess, is to take that first leap. I think India said the government helps, but Sri Lanka, we are not as fortunate as India, and maybe some other countries also, the government cannot help at this point of time. So that transformation, right, is a challenge, right? Then, of course, you can have so many other things we are talking about. One of the other big issue, I just mentioned it, we can talk about it, I think is knowledge and data, right? I think it was mentioned, use of data. We don't know what we are doing because we don't have data, we don't use the data we have, we don't update the data, we don't share data, and we don't coordinate with each other. Governments, development partners, unfortunately, it's still weak. So I think there is so much to, and we talked about digitalization. Of course, the digitalization, a lot of good things were talked about.
Requires data.
But it has not gone down. There is still the big divide. Big divide is there. There's so much of potential that yet to be harnessed by digitalization. So there's so much to be done. And
what is our role as a development cooperation?
So
I think for the entire panel, actually, and thank you for kind of looking at all the different challenges. And indeed, UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, is in the process of developing a global environmental data strategy. We've just convened around 3 weeks ago in Vienna, the entire global community, the different actors on this topic through the Science Policy Business Forum and the digital transformation teams, including in UNDP and in so many, the EU and so many other organizations. But I think the key question, so you've listed for us the landscape, more or less, the suite of different challenges that we are all facing, especially in developing countries and the countries that are going through a tough time post-COVID, many of them, of course, including Sri Lanka. But I think that I want to go back and I will move to Sonali, and then we will get back. But what is the role of development cooperation? A very esteemed colleague who works with us on the finance initiative of the UN, he told me once, our role will never be at scale, to change things at scale, but to build the pilots, to build the foundations, to support in the direction, but there are limitations. So maybe from the point of view of your organization, how do you see it?
Thanks very much for that. I think I'll just start by perhaps just explaining what Global Green Growth Institute is, because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with GGGI. We are an international intergovernmental organization. Our headquarters is in Seoul, and it's a member-based organization. There are 46 member countries, and Sri Lanka is one of the countries. I think one of the, following up from what Visakha just said, I mean, one of the issues is also actually the lack of financing, right? And we discussed this, several of the speakers earlier were mentioning that. And I think, so some of the key roles that we have in terms of development cooperation is supporting, actually bridging that gap in terms of the financing. So for example, at GGGI, we work work really closely with the government, but also with the private sector, and basically look at ways of tapping into both the domestic and international capital market to access the finances which are required for the interventions. So in terms of sustainable investments, again, one of the issues is I think a lack of bankable projects being developed. And for example, with GGGI, we use an approach where we support the countries and the partners in terms of developing those bankable projects and basically supporting them in accessing, so helping with the technical side of things, but also then supporting in accessing the finances that are required for that process.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Rohel, and Rohel, you have a very interesting program across the EU. The way it is implemented, the way it responds to situations where there's change, which is kind of a mark of our times, I suppose. So tell us a bit more.
Thank you. Little disclaimer, I don't work for the EU, I work for Expertise France, so we are the French Development Cooperation Agency, and we implement the EU Green Recovery Facility in Sri Lanka. So I think I would like to answer your question about how cooperation agency can support our partners. I will also like to react on the demystifying part you mentioned on like how the lack of bankable project. First, that's for sure, like demystifying is an important part of what we do. Because like sometimes you hear like sustainable approaches for developed markets. It's not like for all kind of market, which is not true. On how we can support is like also by mainstreaming some of important messages. For example, when you think about sustainability, and I think it's really important in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka it's in a way like a counterexample for that, like it's balancing value chains. It's saying, okay, sustainability is achieving resilience of value chain because like they are more efficient, they are more circular, they need less inputs, external inputs, less resources, so they are more resilient. And then when they are submitted to some sort of stress, like what happened here last year, well, they will be able to survive in a better way. So it's really important, like for us to mainstream these kind of messages and saying, yes, sustainability is resilience and it's a macroeconomic opportunity. So what you asked us, like how we can support that, is also, I think, planning is an important aspect and something we're discussing here today. Unlike development partners, we can support this step because like the issue like many governments can face all around the world is like facing too much on like short-term issues. And if you focus too much on short-term, or like forget the middle term, the long-term objective you want to achieve, you can enter in what we call the lock-in effect. So for example, okay, gas generation, like for power generation, yeah, it's better than coal, or it's better than other kind of carbon intense like energy sources. But at the same time, like in 15 years from now, you'll be facing another kind of issue and you'll be able to achieve your long-term GHG emission reduction, for example. So thinking long-term on like making sure like when we work with our partners from the development sector, from the government sector, also private sectors, that we keep in mind that long-term aspect. On last message, like regarding what you said, like obviously like the lack of some type of bankable project. Well, we can support also the private sector through on the government sector, like to access to sustainable finance, or you could say call sustainable finance, impact investment, to because like obviously like if you work only like with private investment, like you are going to like invest a bankable project, but we can like bridge that gap on making sure like more bankable project will appear in the market in a few years from now. So that would be my third message. I try to keep it short.
No, thank you very much. That's really useful. And then it's really good to move to the State Department of the US on the same issue of development cooperation, its actual impact. Are we where we need to be? Do we need to shift? And you talked to me before about whole of society approach. Tell me a little bit more about that, Rob.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I'm Rob Wing from State Department. Can you hear me? Super interesting question, really interesting topic, and thank you for inviting me here today. And thanks for all of everybody's contribution. I've learned a lot today, and I'm going to focus a little bit on the demystifying part. And in answer to your question in general about whether we're there yet, I would say probably not, but I think we're working towards it. And to me, it's one of my roles in the U.S. At the U.S. State Department is I'm actually the alternate council member for the U.S. on the Global Environment Facility Council. And so I talk with my fellow council members about these issues all of the time. And I think one of the really important things about demystifying is just, and doubling down on what some of my colleagues said, is just really sharing information. I think the more that we convene, like in situations like this, the more that we talk to each other, the more that we have an understanding of who's involved and who to go to, and the more that we have that available in platforms that are easy to access, the better. So for example, one of the things that we hear all the time on the Global Environment Facility is we don't know how to access the funds, or we don't know who our points of contact are for accessing the funds. And so there's funds available, there's funds out there, but people just don't have an understanding of where to go. So making that information available, sharing information, and just making sure, and also working with the facility, the Global Environment Facility or other facilities, to make sure that there is a team on the ground in country that can help get access and help, sort of help the governments figure out where to go and how to apply and how to get access. Super important, and I think that's something that I know that Jeff is working on. Another thing that I think is important is being creative and thinking creatively about how to finance some of these projects. This is a real privilege for me to be part of this, but I was part of the council that just established the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And a couple of things that we did there that what I think were incredibly creative is we made a requirement that 25% of the funds, I think it's 25, don't quote me on the statistics, but be implemented through international financial institutions, so through the development banks. And one of the reasons we decided to do that is because there's such a little amount of funding that goes through those banks from the JEF now, and we really want to try and increase the amount of funding that goes through the banks, because we think it'll leverage more funding. But if you get the banks on board, it'll leverage more. They're able to work with the private sector to really leverage more funding. So I think that's a really another important part of it, is to try and figure out a way that it's not just the development financing, but it's the development financing is used as a way to leverage the private sector, to leverage foundations, to leverage funding really from the whole of society. So another thing that I think is the other thing that we did in this Global Biodiversity Framework Fund is we made a requirement. It's not a requirement, it's a target that 20% of the funds work with indigenous people and local communities. Another super important aspect. I mean, it's really focusing on the groups that really need it the most, and sort of the most vulnerable communities. I'm not an expert on the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, but I think there's also a part of that is focusing on tribes and local communities that I think is very helpful and creative. So in general, I think, as you mentioned, I was going to talk about whole of society. I think making sure that you're bringing in everyone into the conversation is what makes the difference. In the US, our environmental movement, really, we have good, strong environmental laws and policies because our society, the public demanded it. We have rule of law in the US with respect to this.
because the public demanded it. We have citizen supervisions that bring people, the public, into the process of enforcing. So I think there's some really creative things you can do, but I hope that answers the question about demystifying development assistance.
Thank you so much. That's really useful. You brought in maybe an aspect that is of great interest, which is the funds. So we do have these hundreds of millions, sometimes more, of money that is in the GEF and that is in the GCF. And maybe the question is, how do you see the role of the private sector there? Both the big corporations, the medium-sized, and the really small, innovative ones. I don't know. I'm actually asking whether through the GEF, through the GCF, through other mechanisms, how do you see that role? And maybe a question for our other colleagues as well.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think that it's a really important question and something that we're struggling with. The GEF has a private sector strategy, and we're hoping that through also in the at least through the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, that working through the development banks, we'll be able to bring in the private sector and get their funds, sort of get them to contribute as well, either funding or their knowledge or any way that they can. We're also, the other thing I would say is, I've heard a lot of people talk about the importance of the government policies and making sure that you get that all right. But I also would say, it's important maybe not to wait for that to be fully in place. We're launching in the US, we just launched a public-private partnership on ending plastic pollution. And one of the ideas is that we're putting some government funding there, but we're also really looking to the private sector to help finance that. And so we're hoping to get at least 5 times the amount of funding. So
how much is that? What is 5 times?
Well, that's a good question. Our initial investment from the US is $15 million. So we're hoping that that's going to grow over time, but we're really counting on foundations in the private sector to really contribute, because it really is a whole of society problem. We're going to need to have everybody involved to find solutions. And we're doing that now. We're very ambitious in the global agreement negotiations. We're very much looking forward to that concluding in 2024. But even if it does, it's going to take a while for it to enter into force, probably a couple of years, and we just can't wait. We've got to do things now, and so that's why we launched this partnership that we're hoping is going to be sort of a way to bring everything together and get all different sectors contributing, get foundations, get the private sector, get government contributing. So we're contributing a little bit in the beginning, but we're hoping other governments contribute and the private sector does, and foundations. So I invite you all to talk to me about it and hopefully become partners in EPIC.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that I have a couple of comments from the floor, so I'm happy to open the floor now. Please introduce yourself and your organization. We need a microphone there.
Thanks. I just have one question that you experts talk about some very interesting topics. And for me, I come from China, from a university, Beijing Chemical Technology. I from the Research Center of Low Carbon Economic and Management Research Center. So it's a very honor and a great pleasure for me to have a chance to attend the meeting. And I have listened many experts talk about the finance, the investment, and I was very interested about the ESG investment, especially in the Asia Pacific region. And I understand some situations in China, but I hope some experts can talk about the ESG development in the Asian and Pacific region. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's a tough question. Yet investment first, like you'll have to define what it is. Like it's still not really clear, like on the financial market, when you are referring to ESG investment. So you can focus on impact investment, on do not harm investment. Like first, like the base is not even clear. And then the issue is more the fact that when you think about impact investment, you don't have units. You don't know how to monitor what you are doing. For example, the easy issue is like GHG mitigation. Okay, we know how many tons of greenhouse gases we emit per year, and we know where we want to be. But like, what about adaptation to climate change? That's something we can't like quantify. There's many topics you can't quantify, so you can't actually make sure that when you're investing for impact investment, well, you are doing it right. So there are many like initiatives also around the world. The EU, for example, has developed the EU Green Taxonomy. Sri Lanka has done the same here. They have developed a taxonomy which is actually based on the EU 100 times one, to lead financial institution, private financial institution, to actually be able first to say, is this investment a green investment or not? That's the initial question, but first you have to be able to answer that question. So as far as, for example, we're going to support the central bank in operationalizing that taxonomy and financial institutions. It's the same like when you think about like green bonds. Like we talk about a lot about green bonds, blue bonds, even like they can be sovereign green bonds, it can be private green bonds. But what is a green bond at the end? Like also, is it like supporting some sort of project for a company, but like, which is like, is it just for a really carbon intensive company to just like develop a solar farm, for example, or like, are you going like for like more in depth? So those are really important questions that at the moment experts all around the world are not even able to answer. So the basis for impact investment, ESG investment, is not even clear.
I thank you very much. This has become more than a marathon, but we are doing very, very well. And I am pleased to now go to our final session. We were a bit creative with the program, but I think with talking about the green bonds, you know, and the financing element, moving from development cooperation to finance. So we are going to combine actually the talk about finance and risk together. But before we do that, I want to see if we have any more comments, maybe UNEP, from the floor on development cooperation and the role of international institutions, and of course the role of the private sector.
Thank you. I just have a small observation with some of these development projects in Asia. They're coming from developing countries where huge investments have been made. And when the funds dry up in 3 to 4 years, things go back to where they were. And it is something that we have observed repeatedly over years. So one of the, I guess, suggestions is to make repeatability and sustainability of the program itself as a key criteria, and then really to consider, are these projects part of the bigger picture or not? Because if you are investing in something that is not the government, supported by government policy and strategy in the long term, really, are you just checking some boxes? I have some programs that I can talk about. It's not nice to list them here, but that has been quite an observation.
Thank you very much. Okay, we thank our panel. That was excellent. Thank you so much. I now hand over for our last segment to my colleague, Budi, looking at finance.
Thank you very much, Shereen. It was a long day for me sitting over there until the final session reached. Well, green growth is something that all of us have spoken about a lot. And every time when green growth is discussed, finance comes into picture. We're talking about sustainable finance, green finance, and so on. So let's try to discuss about finance. And I would like to invite the following dignitaries to the head table or chairs over there on stage. Anup Poda is a Senior Managing Director of Investment from Eversource Capital India. Sushara Vaidisagara, Chief Investment Banker, Banking, Commercial Bank of Ceylon. Nalin Karunatilaka, Vice President Sustainability of DFCC Bank. Dr. Rashmi Bomiria, CEO and Chief Digital Officer of RS Matrix. And finally, Tuasi Tiwak, Director, Ministry of Climate, Environment and Energy and Disaster Management from Vanuatu. She's missing, she was there. Okay, hope you got microphones. From Vanuatu, she's missing, hopefully she will come in soon. Okay, a few questions for you all. I mean, we have already given you certain information, but out of that, let me first target my question to Anup Poddar, and I think, Anup Poddar, I think that's important. It's an important component that we have to study because all of us, as I told you a little while ago, was talking about green financing and so on. But can we know to what extent, for example, the financial institutions are prioritizing investments or green investments over normal investments, as we call it, when it comes to equitable green growth? Over to you.
Thank you for the invitation, by the way, and very nice to meet everyone over here. I think there is a huge gap. As I started in the morning, there's a huge gap. There is $100 billion pledge or need for $1 trillion investment every year to achieve what we want to achieve. But there's a huge gap that actual investment is less. The financial institutions are trying their best. They are investing, but they're not really prioritizing green growth over their returns. The returns are paramount. And we talk about double bottom line or triple bottom line. I think the financial markets are very much still about single bottom line. And we have to make sure we change our approach that the single bottom line remains. So we either put a carbon tax or we put some kind of incentive so that they are very much focused on achieving their final goal, which is the returns. So they are making efforts, but still a lot more needs to be done. We need to move away from triple bottom line discussion to a single bottom line discussion.
Thank you very much. Well, let me move on to Sushara Vaidyasagara, from Sri Lanka. Would like to know from you about the public-private financing, and also to see how we can balance it to achieve the real equitable outcome on green growth. Over to you.
Thank you. So actually, there are some of these infrastructure projects, and when it comes to green financing, some of these projects are with new technology, are high risk. So in that context, and some of them are new, as I told. So to begin with, I think it's best to have public finance support those projects initially, and so that there is some amount of confidence that is generated so that the feasibility of these projects is seen, so that the private sector can then come in to finance those activities. Then again, actually, there could be a lot of capacity building that could be done by the public sector in talking about getting that technology out there, and what is there as technology, as facilities, as incentives that may be available to a large scope of people. When that comes into being, also between the private sector and the public sector, there could be a lot of knowledge sharing. And this knowledge sharing could come in many ways, where the private sector shares their expertise, their knowledge in terms of successful projects. So those and the best practices that they have implemented, these can be shared between the private sector and public sector in trying to get better projects going. And as the advisor to the president was saying, I think PPPs are something that could be looked at. And actually, Sri Lanka hasn't seen a great many PPPs successfully being implemented, still there has been some success stories. And having said that, so we can take a look at PPPs and success stories elsewhere and try to learn from those and bring that also into the forefront of some of the activities. So those are some of the ways in which the public finance could collaborate with the private finance and take these initiatives forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Going back to Nalin Karunatilaka from DFCC Bank, and very recently I know you got accredited as an accredited agency for GCF, Green Climate Fund, which is a topic that we discussed a while ago as well, but I'm just posing you a different question, different type of question. When you look at the equitable green growth, since the subject is green growth and financing, does the focus on short-term economic gain hinder long-term environmental sustainability?
Not necessarily. Right? I mean, for example, DFCC was set up as a development bank in 1955 with a private sector focus. The government had a minority investment in the bank, and we were listed on the stock exchange from 1955. So we had to be answerable to our shareholders while having a development focus. So we had to invest in development projects of the country and take make high risk investments, and also be profitable and give a return to our shareholders. So we had a dual mandate or dual objectives. And we did take high risk investment. We invested in the first cellular phone company in 1989. The very first mini hydro project, 1996, the very first, all the renewable energy project, wind and solar and so forth, we took a lead in green financing, together with, banks like commercial banks, and we had a lot of support from, we implemented the World Bank project, right? And the World Bank, we had the money to, and World Bank project was also, there was a JEF component also in it. So there was a JEF grant plus World Bank financing. The World Bank gave loans in SDRs or dollars to the government. The government took the exchange risk, and the government then lent the money in rupees to the Sri Lankan banks, and we lent it to the beneficiary. Because there was an off-grid component and an on-grid component. So off-grid components were for very, at the bottom of the pyramid people. The on-grid were for large-scale, developers. But we managed to, we brought all those partnerships, and the government took the exchange risk, we took the credit risk, the World Bank took the risk, and the GCF gave us a grant, and we managed many projects like that. But now the scenario has changed entirely. The government cannot help us any longer, and we have to work with, say, we can get money from the Green Climate Fund, but we can't get exchange risk mitigation from the government like we got earlier. The gentleman from the AIIB was talking about local currency finance.
Yeah.
That comes in, we can unlock a lot of international financing for countries like Sri Lanka, especially middle income countries. But having said that, so right now we might then focus on profits and getting a return to, focus on, say, mitigation projects. But when you're looking at, say, adaptation projects or, biodiversity projects, we are looking at, the returns will be lower. We are looking at the bottom of the pyramid. So then we need to take a long-term view. The risks are much higher, right? So DFCC is now a commercial bank. We are answerable to our shareholders.
Yeah.
We have to maintain our ROEs and ROIs. And the central bank is also looking at our capital. So when we give a loan to a high-risk sector, we need to, sponsor more, have more capital. So we need some support from the government if we need to go towards these other high-risk sectors. Because ultimately, on a long-term basis, we need to get the whole country involved. We can't just focus on short-term. We have to support the bottom of the pyramid. We need to support the large-scale enterprises also. But if the partnerships are available, because the banks can see this. The central bank, the regulators, we have green finance taxonomy, and we are encouraged to invest in green projects. So we have to report how many green projects we invested in on a quarterly basis, and they will then give us, carrot and stick approach. So we can manage it.
Yeah, so just one follow-up question. What is the way forward that you think with all the restrictions, challenges that you face in terms of green financing?
We talk about financing or the lack of financing, but I think there is financing, but the issue is the cost of financing. Right? You can get international finance, so the international investor will want a return in dollars. right? And there will be a risk element for countries like Sri Lanka, even for least developed countries. So when you build in the risk element into that cost, the cost obviously gets too much to fund projects which you know, the investor in Sri Lanka or the country Sri Lanka will expect a lower cost. So we need to bridge that gap. So finding a way of bridging the gap of this, the risk demand, the return demanded by an international investor or even a private investor in Sri Lanka, and versus the the return that can be generated by a project, right? So
Okay.
managing the cost is the key.
Shara, I would like to come back to you now. I mean, on a similar line, in your bank, being a private bank, what are the prospects that you see in the future with respect to green financing? Your private banks get involved in?
Yeah, actually, I think most banks in Sri Lanka are very actively engaging in green financing activities. And as Sonali was saying earlier, bankable projects are scarce. And if there are bankable projects, I don't see any reason why any bank will not finance it. And even though there is a lack of financing in form of refinance availability, the banks themselves are using their own financing, which may be at a higher cost, of course, and are committed to financing these projects. And if I take our bank, for instance, we are very conscious of supporting green financing activities. And we, in fact, have taken an initiative to actually consider green financing at a lower cost. So it's a hit to us, but we consciously have taken that decision. And this is also because we ourselves are very conscious of our sustainability commitments. And so that corporate strategy also to be achieved, we do take that hit and we finance these activities. So that is one of the ways in which we see ourselves actively financing these activities.
Okay. Thank you very much. Rashmi Bomiria, you are the CEO of RS Matrix. And people are talking about data-driven economies, right? And the data solutions, data science, for example, when it comes to higher studies, things that people talk about a lot these days. And there's a lot of future that as we see. When you look at data-driven economy, the data science aspects, and investments coming in, what is the current scenario and what do you see the future going to be?
Yeah, so I will digress a little bit also, but
Sure.
I will talk about data because I think in the interest of time, and I do have a key message to convey too.
Please.
So when it comes to like at least in the previous last panel, the data aspect of it came into the surface. But if you think about the entire day program, we talked about policy making, coming with innovations around climate mitigation, risk mitigation, and so on, but less about the data aspect of it. But I know that UNEP is also coming up with the open data program, which is really good. So the problem is, as stated earlier on by esteemed director of UNEP earlier in the day, the science is already there. And the policies are also being made. To a certain extent, it make use of science. And the organizations are somewhat adhering to the policies, somewhat adhering to the guidance provided by the science. But the gap we see is that there's no granular level of data that organizations can use so that the actions can be made immediately and you can actually measure your performance then and there. Otherwise, you're just walking in the dark. If you can't measure it, you can't really manage it.
Yes.
So the key thing is you have to go into the granular asset level when it comes to analyzing climate risk, biodiversity loss, and so on. So while the other industries, other governmental organized institutions are focused on policy creation and coming up with innovations around climate mitigation, I'm proud to say as RS Metrics, we have thought about this data gap, and we came up with what we call as ESG signals, where we track asset level, environmental, climate, physical risk, and biodiversity indicators. And we map these indicators to the parent companies. So the organizations themselves can drill down to the asset level and understand, okay, if it is methane emissions, we quantify, detect actual ground truth data, not estimates, emission estimates that are based on emission factors. This is using geospatial data. We quantify emissions, and not just that, whether it is land usage, land cover, heat wave, cold wave risks, or biodiversity loss. We do track that at the asset level, and we do that baselining and benchmarking, all of that we do. So I think that's a key game changer here, and that kind of data is required and should be integrated in policy making as well as made available to the organizations to work with.
Thank you very much. Tuasi, coming from Vanuatu and looking at the diversity in the Asia-Pacific region and looking at climate risk, as was told a little while ago, and also, I mean, the risk assessment process, data science, the need for data. When you look at everything in a holistical perspective, right, with the diversity component coming into picture, bringing in financing, for example, what are the potential, what are the challenges that you face?
Yes, thank you. That's Vanuatu, like many of the Pacific Islands, we face a lot of the issues that we've just heard the panel express. The issue of data really comes into play. We have the loss, we don't understand GCF processes. It's the data that we are able to access this finance. So it's really, when you look across the discussions throughout the day, it's pointing at coming together with the data to be able to actually do the compliance, do the monitoring, do the enforcement for all the legislations that we put in place. So while governments do the policies, it's the data to be able to say we've actually achieved this so much in so little time, or we haven't. Even quantifying that with the data, we don't have that data to be able to say the story. It's the story that we need to tell, that we don't have the data to tell that story. Yeah. And I think that's what we need to drive home, that it's important that we have this data, and across the Asia Pacific, including the Pacific, we just don't have those innovative data sets to be able to create those stories. And it's often just a storytelling, but to be able to say, this is the amount of emissions, this is the adaptation issues that we have, it's very lacking, yes.
About the investment component coming in to support what you said right now, what are the potentials and challenges that you have?
There's a lot of potentials in the islands. We look at being able to access a lot of these finances. Again, the issue of data, to be able to say, we have got this amount of forests that we'd like to conserve, to put aside for these issues. It's very difficult for us in the Pacific, and especially Vanuatu. We can't meet the criteria in the bank, and we aren't able to quantify that. And that data is it's missing in the terms that, can we meet what the banks require us to do? So the investment is there, the programs are there, but whether it's conducive for the islands to be able to access and to be able to do those programs, that's the big issue.
Right, Rashmi, once again, you spoke of data and everything, but when it comes to investment component to support your activities in the future, have you partnered with any other financing sector?
We have partnered with mostly the tech partners, because the digitization aspect is also key in the data component. So we have partnered mostly with the technology partners, while we are working, or we are catering to the financial institutions.
Right, okay, got the point. Anup, last question from me for you. Looking at the Asia Pacific region once again, overall, about the investment opportunities that are there, especially looking at green growth, and of course, data management aspects as well. What is your view? What is there in store for us for future?
So earlier this year, we started a strategy study for all the countries in the region and Middle East. I think what came out of that study was that there's a huge potential, both in terms of renewable energy, e-mobility, waste to wealth, circular economy, storage, all aspects of energy transition, sustainability, urbanization. what was missing, which has been covered all day, is the policy advancements. And that's why I was giving example of India to some extent. India is by no means perfect.
Yeah.
But the government started policy making about 5 years ago or a bit earlier. And then slowly they took roots and people started to believe in the returns potential and the government support. It's still a lot more to be done there. But in Asian countries, what we concluded that they were perhaps a couple of years, if not 4 or 5 years behind in various countries. And we went country by country. What policies are there, and those policies are needed. Those policies are needed to be in place for the outside investors. Public finances obviously can come in, but the private investments have a cost, and for them to come in, they need stability and some visibility on, sure, I can have a loss leader to start with, as you said, short-term gain versus long-term gain. We can have a loss leader so we can establish ourselves, but it has to be, ultimately, the project has to make money for the private investor. So that's the answer. There is a policy making needs to be done more. There is already a lot being done. I think more is needed.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all from me. Any questions from colleagues? Yes, go ahead. Can I have a microphone over here, please? Quick question and quick answers. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for all this kind of information. I just will give some comments because I think policy is very important. In terms of PPP, China previously had a lot of kind of PPP program. In 2019, reached to the over 10,000 in the financial ministry. And later on, the policy change to go to the ecological oriented development. This one's a green economy for long-term sustainability. This project will be replace PPP. So PPP now it will slow down, shift the policy, engage in long-term can be sustainable. This kind of finance, green finance, this kind of program. I think this policy is very important for guiding businesses towards science of green economy. Right.
Thank you very much for that comment. Any other comment or questions? Yes, please. A microphone over there.
Yeah.
Please identify yourself.
I'm from Ceylon Bank. Once I introduce anyway, Sandrine from Ceylon Bank, Sustainability Manager. In terms of keeping this momentum going on, what would be our second day? Of course, today is the last day that we are meeting each other. A lot of wealth of knowledge that was shared. Then putting it into action, can we have an engagement forum like a consultative paper, a baseline that could be developed, and then there would be many people here who wants to talk, but then couldn't have opportunity. So in terms of having their inputs leveraged into that paper and also to put it into action, formidable actions, a series of actions where we can phase out the development, and we would arrive as a nation, as a whole, and also Asia Pacific as a region. So that would be a very fruitful ending for us, everyone who wants to have a sustainable future, a transformative, digitally penetrated future for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments that you would like to make? Anyone? Yes, sir.
I just thought I will end by saying, I recently watched a movie. I'm not going to talk about the movie, but the title was great. And I wanted to end by saying, we got to do everything, everywhere, all at once, right now. We cannot wait.
Yes, that's quite right. One more, last question. Yes, can I have a mic? Okay. Excited by yourself.
This is more of a statement of a question. Right? So as we talk about green financing, I think one key vertical that we should do more is agricultural development, right? And in fact, just now even the sidebar with Minister Zia, he has also mentioned it's a clear intersection of sustainability, food security, as well as financial inclusion. On that, I would like to request my partner, Vijay Pawat from to share a little bit about some of the agricultural digitalization work that we've done, particularly also highlighting perhaps some of the funding challenges.
Cookie, thank you very much.
I am Vijay Pawat.
I wanted,
can you hear me?
Yes, I wanted to actually, I wanted to, thank you so much.
Sure.
So I actually wanted to end this segment with the case study from India on innovation in agricultural financing. And perhaps if I can just invite Vijay to come to the podium and just share this very positive example as a case study where we can conclude this segment at on a positive note on innovation.
So it's good timing, right? Isn't it?
So you want me to speak specifically about I'm audible, right? The financing aspect of it, right? Just going back to my experience, we started working with the smallholder farmers in India way back in 2009. And I've seen that they go through multiple challenges, right? And it's a fight for them as far as their livelihood is concerned every single day. They have no access to affordable credit. They have no access to high quality inputs. They have no access to scientific advisories, neither high quality inputs, right? And their daily activities are controlled by a multiple layer of ecosystems, which doesn't allow them to come out of the problems what they're facing. So we as a company, what we did was that to just plug ourselves or land ourselves right in the middle of action and started giving them the solutions what they want. And as far as financing concerned, we found, I think initially we thought it cannot be solved because most of them are non-bankable or underbanked. They don't have the credit score which allow them to approach formal credit from anywhere. And none of the banking institutions or the green financing opportunity doesn't reach them. So we decided to find a way to crack it. The only way to kind of initiate a flow of finance into them is to kind of counter guarantee them, which we did. And that kind of help, I'm just taking a few examples, help some of the farmers whom we actually be working with who had less than 300% CRIP score to move up to 670%, 600, 650 or 700, which made them, kind of, formally bankable. So this is what was needed. And that we could do it in a very small scale initially when we did it. We did it with partnership, we built a partnership to make it happen. But with our partnership with MasterCard, when we digitize the entire transactions, what they did, when they digitize their entire movement of goods, that I kind of created sufficient database which parallelly allow banks to look at in a different way how we can fund them. So in 2019, when we started just before COVID, we could fund around 30 farmers. Now we have funded close to around 5,000 farmers. And we have moved them out of the challenges what they're facing towards getting the formal funding. In fact, now they're able to go and even access the main bank to get funding for other requirements. Right? I'm just particularly picking this aspect of it. So there is a need to kind of find, affordable finance for them, and there is a way to address it. We had to think differently, and it is time for the banking institutions and other kind of financing institutions to bite the bullet. This will be my advice, right? Because we don't have time, absolutely no time. I said about the problems what they're facing. On one side, they're also often facing all the climate change related issues, right? Unless we actually kind of handhold them to move towards sustainable agricultural practices, we will not have food to eat. This is a reality. So this is my 2 bits, which I thought I would share.
Thank you very much. Let's also give a big round of applause to the panel who are here. Thank you very much for being with us. Shereen, over to you.
Thank you so much. A reminder, please. We do hope that you would share with us, if you like, your 3 or 4 or 5, but not more, key points that you would like to put on the within the messaging to the ministerial fora. 41 governments are negotiating, are doing so much in a very, very limited period of time, and your voices are very important, and your voices are going to be translated and packaged and given to them. So if our note takers, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, we thank them for their very hard work with us. They've been taking notes of this very important conversation. And I think we will make every effort to ensure that this important conversation and the conclusions reach to the policymakers the way they should. But definitely what we hope is that you would also, if you have concise messaging, very important messaging that you want to share or to filter, share them with Yusuf from our team, and we will capture them in our reporting by tomorrow latest, please, because time is of the essence. Where do we go from here? We will hear the voice, one voice representing civil society who have been having their Congress at the same time, and one voice representing the future youth. And this is how we will conclude. I think what we heard today is very important, and just to sum up some of the issues, we underscored the importance of conversation and of greater cohesion in terms of how we translate our perspectives between science, between policy and business. And I think we need to create better opportunity, and this message was heard loud and clear, and we will create better opportunities. This is the beginning, it is not the end. The Science Policy Business Forum, working with the Asia Pacific region and the the UNEP office for Asia Pacific, only started in 2021 during COVID. It meets every other year, and then it feeds into the global process, which is the highest level United Nations decision-making body of the environment, which is the UN Environment Assembly. The UN Environment Assembly was 193 governments with ministerials. Some representation at the head of state level is going to be in Nairobi, where Asia Pacific is going to be part of it. And it's going to be from the end of February to the beginning of March. The executive director and the bureau of the UN Environment Assembly has committed to a big presence for the Science Policy Business Forum during this UN Environment Assembly 6. You are invited, your voices would be there again at the global level. So I think being part of these regional processes are very important, because they allow us the opportunity to really look deep into the region, to be able to interact, to have these meetings and side discussions. But I think the opportunity to also showcase your technologies. For the first time, we are going to have the World in 2050 arcade. And this is the first time we do it, where we want to see the solutions. We want to be able not only to listen, but to see and to experience what is the ambition in terms of technology and solutions by 2050, because UNEP is drawing a new medium-term strategy. That's 193 governments committing to a new vision, to a new set of actions. And your work could actually show us the solutions, not only the crises, but the solutions and how to resolve these crises. So this collaboration we value, and we thank you, especially those who came from very far away to be with us, and those who contributed their time in a long session during a long day, but yet I found it exhilarating, exciting, and very, very useful. So we thank you very much. And I'd like now to give the floor to our representatives from civil society and from the youth groups to give us kind of final words to close our session. So I am happy to welcome here to the podium Mina Bilgi. Professor Mina Bilgi is representing the Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resources Management India, and she's the spokesperson on behalf of major groups and stakeholders. And I would also like to welcome Robina Adhikari, the Asia Pacific Youth Group representative. If you would please take your places here and here. They report back to a very influential set of groups who play a big role in informing and advising governments in the Asia-Pacific region. Okay. Go ahead, please. You can sit down or stand. It's totally up to you. Okay. Rubina, yeah, you can come here. Thank you. You are. Thank you.
For giving, am I audible? Okay. Am I audible? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk on behalf of the major group and civil society. It is evident from the discussions today, the whole day, that science, technology, and business nexus require thorough social, political, ethical, and legal changes for better democratic control. That is why we are talking here about greener future, we are talking about transformative changes, collaborations, and partnerships, etc. A huge gap has opened between civil society, scientists, and businesses. For example, major health and environmental scandals of past years, asbestos, PCBs, and nuclear disaster, etc., relate to mistrust by the civil society in science, technology, and business. It became evident that restoring the link between scientists, policymakers, and civil society was important. And therefore, over the years, new science and innovation spaces has been established, promoting inclusion of people's experiences, knowledge, and attitudes in science and policy making and in technology. These have affected science-related areas of public policies, such as global warming, the price of antiviral drugs in developing countries, wireless smart meters, or the trade of genetically modified organisms. Such examples are there, but they are not many. But these examples very strongly emphasize the active engagement of people with different forms of knowledge and from different sectors for better understanding of science, scientific technical processes, for responsible decision making, and for a shared future. Again, men, women, youth, and indigenous communities differ in their knowledge, attitudes, and perceptions because of the way they interact with the environment and natural resources. They have different roles and responsibilities within the purview of social, cultural, and economic dimensions. Their experiences and knowledge in scientific research, in development of technologies and businesses have better chances for people-centered, inclusive policies and action. Thank you so much. I like to invite Manda from civil society to add few more interventions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Manda from Mongolia, working in Center for Human Rights and Development. I just want to make several points, recommendations to the companies and private sectors. Fully comply with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and also the national laws and regulations. And recommendations to the government: engage with the communities, especially indigenous peoples, to hear their concerns, and collaborate with local NGOs to provide capacity building to communities, to increase their legal awareness, participation in decision-making processes, and also about the development partnership, not only the government and the business sector, but also involve CSOs in this, and access to participation and to information, and be transparent and accountable. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rupita Adhikari, and I'm here representing Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP, and I'm from Nepal. As now we are here concluding this session, I want to extend my heartfelt thank you for the insights shared today, especially around the creative solutions for the funding mechanism. The Science Policy and Business Forum have been truly a powerful platform bringing together these vital areas of focus. Standing here, I'm thrilled to announce the successful completion of the Asia Pacific Youth Environment Forum, a two-day event that emphasized youth engagement, skill building, and inclusivity. We had over 100 participants from 13 different countries, both in person and online, making it a truly regional effort, supported by the Ministry of Sri Lanka, along with different UN head agencies. And during this forum, we collaboratively crafted a youth manifesto with key points for actions. I would like to take this platform as an opportunity to highlight the few statements from our manifesto and the discussion we had on our own Science Policy Business Forum youth segment yesterday. We urged the establishment of a special fund to support young entrepreneurs and innovators in the green technology sector. Many youth-led startups face financial barriers, and this fund should provide mentoring, access to markets, and incentives for sustainable solutions. The digital divide should be addressed by investing in affordable internet access, digital literacy programs, and providing services. Bridging this gap ensures that all youth can access online resources, networks, and educational opportunities. Collaboration across government, private sector, and youth-led organizations should be encouraged and incentivized. Such partnerships foster innovation, coherence in policies, and sustainable development. We encourage to promote inclusivity by ensuring the regional forums and conferences are fully accessed to everyone, including marginalized communities, individuals with disabilities, and religious and ethnic minorities. We also encourage Asia Pacific nations to support the Green Jobs for Youth Pact, initiated by UNEP, ILO, and UNICEF. This pact aims to create decent and sustainable employment opportunities for young people in the green sector. We also prioritize youth involvement in crucial decision-making process, especially in the scientific and environmental entities such as IPCC, IPBES, and IRP. The diverse expertise will lead to innovative solutions and practical applications. We are on a shared journey towards a more sustainable and inclusive world. Your dedication to these causes is very crucial at the moment. And thank you very much for the invitation today.
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, you've had a productive but definitely a long day with us today. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we call this session adjourned to the next Science Policy Business Forum Asia Pacific, but also to the UN Environment Assembly 2024. And I'm sure we'll see many of you at COP28 at the UNEP Pavilion. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.